Captain Marvel was the central character in the initial war against Thanos, but the long-term player in his story has yet to even be mentioned. That character was an unlikely person to say the least, a one-off who managed to resist death, both literal and actual, time after time. Adam Warlock. Warlock is a bit like Deadpool in that, while credit for the creation technically goes to one person or team, it's really others that gave them the character facets that are most memorable. So we'll start with Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's creation and go on to where Warlock truly comes into his own. The character begins as an off-screen presence in Fantastic Four number 66. A group of scientists, all tops in their field, has taken Alicia, Ben Grimm's girlfriend, to help them with a problem. They are working to solve the world's problems by creating a race of perfected humans. Their creation is a being of such luminescent brilliance that they don't know what it looks like, which is why they went to Alicia. She's a blind sculptor, and so can approach the creature safely and then create an accurate facsimile for them to look at. The creature is referred to only as him. By the time issue 67 rolls around, it's obvious the scientists have become terrified of him and want to destroy their creation. But him is powerful, and in the end, only Alicia is able to get close, clearly empathetic for the creature, and is shocked to discover that him has created a cocoon for further metamorphosis. But the scientists wanted to control him, and now fear that they can no longer dominate their creation. After the Fantastic Four rescue Alicia and depart, him emerges, a golden Adonis who rejects their evil plans for him and leaves as well. They fear that would destroy them, but he doesn't care at this time. We'll see later on that he feels guilty about the possibility that he might have killed them. Spoiler, he didn't. That seems to be the end for him. But then 2 years later, Stan and the King Kirby brought him back in the pages of Thor, beginning with issue number 163. Thor is in love with his fellow Asgardian, Sif, but she's gone missing. In pursuing her, the pair wind up fighting mutates from the post-atomic war's future ruled over by the Roman god Pluto. But in one of the 20th century buildings is a container holding a cocoon similar to the one seen in Fantastic Four number 67. Anyway, going on to Thor 164, Pluto talks about wanting to destroy the thing of unimaginable power that's inside the nearby building, but instead is soon leading an assault on the 20th century to conquer it with his mutate army. Pluto is thwarted by his brother Zeus, who is actually a Greek god, but we're not here to discuss mythology. But back in that building, the figure inside the cocoon begins to emerge as the issue ends. In 165, Thor says he wants to check out that building, if it has a power that even Pluto is fretting over, and discovers the newly hatched him, who explains his backstory and how he left Earth with ever-growing guilt for destroying his creators, even if they were evil men, only for a series of mistakes to finally compel the Watcher to send him back to Earth. Him decides that to be complete requires a mate, and thus takes Sif and departs. But Thor pursues, and finally, in issue number 166, he and him face off in a proper battle. Him states that he has no wish to fight and bears no ill will to Thor, unaware of just how enraged the Thunder God is over this, forcing a fisticuffs battle. But during all this, Sif pleads that him is mentally little more than a child, ignorant despite all of the power that he has. In the end, him creates a cocoon again and escapes into space, while Thor's mad battle compels his father Odin to punish him with exile until he finds the whereabouts of Galactus. Thus bringing back him was to use an adversary that would both drive Thor out of his mind, but without a malicious intent. Stan and Kirby were just making use of a piece that happened to fit that particular puzzle nicely. It was not for nearly 3 more years that him would finally return, and with a name, in the launch of Marvel Premiere number 1. This issue came out in 1972, during the Kree-Skrull War days, to give it some context. And we are following the High Evolutionary. Now, when we last saw the High Evolutionary in Tales to Astonish, in an issue involving the Hulk, the High Evolutionary evolved himself into a higher being 5 years ago. Well, he's decided to return to corporeal form, but with his power to evolve and devolve now a part of his being, and having restored Saram back to life. While wandering, they come across Him's cocoon, take it on board, and the High Evolutionary communicates with the evolving Him inside. This leads to a meeting of the Mutual Admiration Society, as Him is an ever-perfecting being, and the High Evolutionary has dreams of making an Earth without aggression. But at the critical moment in his recreation of the Earth, where man has emerged but before the aggressive instinct can be purged, the High Evolutionary passes out from exhaustion, and a force led by the man-beast arrives and advances forward, making the humans instead more warlike. There is a fight on the ship between the new men and the High Evolutionary, until Him is compelled to emerge and intervene. The new men escape to the world, counter-Earth, and at this moment things get very Christian. And for that reason I'll start referring to Him as Warlock, because it's been hard enough already having a capitalized Him to deal with before we get God involved. The High Evolutionary wants to destroy the world because of this sin, but Warlock has had a change of heart, seeing there is enough potential for good there that he believes that those people are worth saving. And so the High Evolutionary agrees that Warlock, who already feels like a son to him, will be sent down to Counter-Earth to be their salvation. And it's just as he is about to go that another important player in this series enters, but it's not a person. The High Evolutionary gives Warlock the Soul Jewel. In issue number 2, Warlock is found and taken in by some young people down on Counter-Earth, who say that he needs a first name too, and thus call him Adam. In the midst of an attack by some new men, Warlock recalls who he is and why he's here, and uses his power plus the power of the Soul Jewel to defeat them. Marvel premiere then ceased, but a few months later Warlock's story continued in the pages of his own self-titled book. Roy Thomas kicked off the first issue, but then immediately handed it to others to carry forward. The recurring motif of the book is the High Evolutionary wanting Warlock to release him from his vow so he can just destroy Counter-Earth, which Warlock refuses. And also, of course, of the man-beast trying to corrupt things, including Warlock himself, but the rest of the world too. All while Warlock has his 5-man entourage following him around. The first 4 issues of this series are an interesting concept severely hampered by its execution. The series does show Warlock his failings as, in a hallucination induced by Man-Beast, Warlock kills his followers for betraying him. In issue 4, one of his followers is dropped from a great height and Warlock fails to reach the kid in time, all while the kid is calling out to Warlock to save him. This allows for a soft reboot of the series to try to discover its footing, as a distraught Warlock spins up a cocoon to allow time to cope with his grief over this. With issue number 5, there's no entourage of teens, the story instead taking advantage of the idea that Counter-Earth is just like Earth, but where superpowers have not appeared, save for Warlock himself. Thus on this world, Victor Von Doom is merely a disfigured genius, and eventually becomes Warlock's ally, while Reed Richards is a Hulk-like monster called the Brute. He'll eventually escape Counter-Earth and become a part of the Frightful Four for a short time. The President, a former acquaintance named Rex Carpenter, note that name when we dial up the Jesus stuff soon, declares Warlock an enemy of the country and must be arrested. He's locked up the remains of Warlock's former followers too, until Warlock's very public heroism in saving the Golden Gate Bridge from the Brute forces the President's hand for the moment. But by the end of issue number 8, it's revealed that the President has been possessed by the Man-Beast all along. Despite the cliffhanger ending, they knew the book was over, but promised that there would be answers to what happens. Those answers would be found over in The Incredible Hulk, in issues 176 to 178. Now, the Hulk had actually visited Counter-Earth with the Rhino back in issue 158, but didn't directly run into Warlock at that time. This time the Hulk is in a rocket belonging to the Inhumans. We will save any Hulk-specific aspects for his series. And thanks to his raging, the rocket is off course and drops him on Counter-Earth, where he's turned back to Bruce Banner in his water landing and taken to the hospital to be treated and questioned by the military. Their reality is Bruce Banner is busy working on something secret with General Ross, so they make the mistake of assuming that he's just a spy, and of not realizing that upsetting Bruce Banner is a mistake. After being grilled about Adam Warlock, Bruce turns, and the report is sent to the President, who is still the Man-Beast, but perceived as a normal human by those around him, just like his other new men servants. He instructs them on how to take the Hulk in with a special mask that will attach to the Hulk's head and gas him unconscious. It is when that is complete that we see the return of a character briefly seen by the High Evolutionary in Warlock's own series, the Recorder, who defeats one of the new men in order to awaken their prisoner, Warlock, leading to issue 177. The unconscious Banner is brought to the underground of the White House, where a tracker is placed on his spine, but an attempt to control him only brings out the Hulk, who runs across his new men allies from his fight against the Rhino, and with his help they can all make it to the hiding place where Warlock now waits. He explains to the Hulk they're trying a revolution in the hopes of saving this world, and Hulk wants to join in the fight rather than run away. Things seem good, but that's when Man-Beast's spinal device activates and fills the Hulk with pain, causing him to lash out. Warlock suspects the situation and asks his followers to restrain the Hulk without harming him, bringing this full circle as he laments that the Hulk is little more than a child. Warlock himself tries to deal with the Hulk, but the arrival of the new men and the transformation of Hulk back into Banner leaves Man-Beast free to take Warlock into custody. With Man-Beast slipping into the body of President Carpenter, the Jesus allegory gets dialed up to 11. Warlock is given a sham public square trial where the Man-Beast's hypnotism compels the crowd to demand Warlock's execution, while Carpenter in the Pontius Pilate role says his hands are clean. Warlock is then placed on a sort of ankh, or in other words, a cross sort of device, that bombards him with destructive energy until he cries out to the High Evolutionary for forsaking him. Then he dies, again entering a cocoon. The Hulk, who admittedly is underrepresented in the Passion of the Christ, takes Warlock's body away, waiting for him to re-emerge, but he doesn't. With Warlock's followers, including both new men allies and the human ones, Hulk lays his body to rest in a cave. On the third day, as the Hulk again takes some liberties in this allegory, as I do not recall stories of the apostles running around kicking the shit out of people, Warlock rises from the dead, stronger now than before, and devolves the enemy new men back into animals before telling his followers to carry out his teachings, and then Warlock ascends into the heavens. If you've ever heard Adam Warlock called Space Jesus, now you know why. But two important things should be noted about this period. First, this is actually a rather small percentage of his overall history. This overt Christian allegory is a total of 13 issues spread out over 3 different series. Second, a significant percentage of this section is junk. I don't mean offensive or not conforming to doctrine or anything else like that. I mean what I'm saying. It's a waste of time, boring, a bloody slog, trying to be deep but having nothing particularly interesting to say. The series wasn't canceled because this was so good, after all. Additionally, an allegory this transparent should have something to say, except it doesn't. These are more like Easter eggs for Christianity, which I realize, especially involving the death and resurrection, would probably be actual Easter eggs. The real takeaway from this period should not be that Warlock is a Space Jesus. It should be that Warlock played the part of Space Jesus, and playing that role had consequences. Acting like a god or a messiah rarely ends well. When this period is spoken of down the line, this aspect of the tale is actually rarely mentioned. It's more that the High Evolutionary served as father figure and mentor to the directionless person hiding in his cocoon. Reading between the lines, in the future Warlock seems to be frankly embarrassed at his youthful antics. This period's significance has been giving Warlock a look and identity, and giving him his soul jewel, or rather, soul gem, as it will be called when Warlock's story continues. Now, things get strange here. Strange tales, that is. Let's fill in the blanks here, because there's a lot of moving pieces. So, starting in the early 50s, there was this comic, Strange Tales. In the pages of Strange Tales, there was a master of the mystic arts by the name of Dr. Strange, and also Nick Fury. Much like Tales to Astonish went from 101 to then be The Incredible Hulk with issue 102, Strange Tales number 168 went to Doctor Strange number 169. Now this happened in the year 1968. Alas, that move was premature because Doctor Strange lasted from 169 to 183 before the book was canceled. That business with him taking on a secret identity and wearing a mask, remember? Well, then he came back with the Defenders, and the Defenders were a hit. They quickly had their own book and guest appearances, and Doctor Strange is becoming popular again, enough to get to solo a book even though it doesn't have his name in the title. Marvel decides to restart Strange Tales, starting with issue 169 because it had left off with 168 back in 1968. So, Doctor Strange is now back in Strange Tales, yes? No. After taking Adam Warlock out of Marvel Premiere, they then immediately made that Doctor Strange's solo book. So, who took over Strange Tales? Brother Voodoo. This was being handled by Len Wein, who had the extraordinarily difficult task of doing a voodoo book when the Comics Code Authority was so strict. When Wein, quite naturally, wanted to bring in zombies in his voodoo book, he was told he had to change it. All of a sudden, Brother Voodoo was fighting AIM because they had created technological zombies, because while technological zombies are acceptable, magical zombies are not. It should be no surprise that soon he stopped doing Brother Voodoo. Instead, 3 of the next 4 issues of Strange Tales got even weirder. Now, if you watched Part 8 of my Hulk series Incredible, you know the Hulk was mistaken for the legendary Golem by an oppressed people looking for a savior. But the Golem itself never appeared, except, of course, in the telling of the story of its legend, but it didn't actually appear in the book. But in Strange Tales, the Golem actually is essentially another superhero. It's the tale of how the Golem rises up and, well, rights wrongs. The other issue, if you're wondering, that didn't have to do with the Golem, was a reprinting of Amazing Adventures number 1. If you're curious, the Golem was put to rest once and for all over in an issue of Marvel 2-in-1 number 11. You're going to find out that a lot of stuff gets mopped up in Marvel 2-in-1. As for Strange Tales, issue 178 was then handed over to Jim Starlin, who was told that he had his pick of characters to play with. He'd impressed with Captain Marvel, so Roy Thomas, and one of the last things he did was ready to give him whatever he wanted. And it was Starlin then who decided to resurrect Adam Warlock and turn him into the character that he is today. So while Doctor Strange is in his old book and Warlock is in Strange's old book, they both have books of their own again. Incidentally, though, eventually Warlock is going to wind up getting back into his own title, which will continue with issue number 9, continuing from where number 8 had left off. So did Strange Tales end with that? No, it kept going. And who is in it now? Doctor Strange. But reprints. Alright, so issue number 178 of Strange Tales gets the reader caught up with Warlock's history, thanks to narration by the guy in the domed helmet. He's going to come up a little later on. Our story then really begins on page 6, where a woman is being chased by some bad guys while trying to find Warlock, desperate that he can save the thousands of people that are in terrible trouble. These people are from the Universal Church of Truth, and they want to execute this unworthy follower. So Warlock intervenes, but when they see how formidable he is, they just ignore him and kill the woman outright. Warlock is distraught, reminded of the 2 friends on Counter-Earth, Eddie, who fell to his death, and Dr. Doom. They perished because he couldn't save them. So he uses the soul gem to temporarily reanimate her corpse so she can explain why she came. The church is built around the magus, a being who appeared 5,000 years ago and set himself up as a god. Within the church there is rigidity, and those outside face judgment by their legions of ships and holy warriors. For all its talk about piety, it is an oppressive, expanding empire. With that info, the magus appears in the form of an enormous ephemeral disembodied head, who torments Warlock with demons. But in the course of this, Warlock learns the truth. The magus is himself. The demons are the demons of his own mind. Warlock must find a way to battle his own split soul, he believes, in order to end this injustice. Issue 179 shows to Warlock even more his role in this. The Ankh cross that he had died on is a recurring icon of the church. It is even present on the ship that Warlock spots belonging to the church, under the command of Autolycus, named after the character of Greek mythology, though they seem to have little in common with each other. He shoots Warlock with the ship's phasers and takes him prisoner, and throws him into a room filled with all manner of inhuman-looking monstrosities that bring Warlock up short. The irony of this is that this is the reason that they have been locked away. The church disfavors those not similar to the human form. These are peaceful, intelligent creatures, yet Warlock's knee-jerk reaction was the same as that of the church. He uses the power of the soul gem to discern their languages, and learns their worlds have all been conquered and their people made slaves. These are all the malcontents, taken away to be reduced to raw materials. The one of their number who is humanoid emerges, Pip the Troll, Warlock's new, sidekick would be overstating it. Pip is slightly more complicated than he seems. Slightly. But he is largely a faithful friend to Warlock. Pip says escaping is easy, he'd have done it already, but none of the others are really physically equipped for the task, so he's not done it yet. Not out of loyalty to them, you understand, because freeing everyone would be much more of a slap across the face to the church. He's holding out for not just a chance to escape, but a chance to insult. The masses ask that Warlock be their leader, but he instead tells a story of how leadership has always led to someone living off the sweat of the weak, even when revolution comes. But before he can explain he will help them anyway, just not lead them, the upset mob break out and try to take the ship with sheer numbers. They would normally have failed miserably. It's only down to Warlock shutting down the lasers and the poison gas that stops them from all getting slaughtered. Meanwhile, the head of the church, the matriarch, has even greater ambition. She wishes to remove her god completely, and understanding that there is a link between Warlock and the magus, she orders Autolycus to arrange an accident for Warlock. He disapproves, but his oath forces his hand, and when he confronts Warlock, the latter laments that he can sense no evil in Autolycus, only a commitment to his duty, a good man duped by a false god. This respect causes Warlock to hold back at a critical moment, so when he is about to die, his soul gem activates and swallows Autolycus' soul, killing him and filling Warlock with the lifetime of memories of the slain man, to feel all that he was, now snuffed out, solely in furtherance of the ambition of someone for whom great power is insufficient next to the temptation of absolute power. With Pip already piloting the escape ship, Warlock heads off to Homeworld. Sometimes a creator takes something that someone made and builds and improves upon it. Peter David took Bill Mantlow's one-issue story and made the Hulk so much more. Al Ewing, decades later, then took Peter David's ideas and built them into something more. What Starlin does with Warlock is just like that. Roy Thomas' Messiah storyline is way too ham-fisted and has nothing particularly notable to say. But Starlin uses that foundation to create his story about playing that out to its worst-case scenario conclusion, of a religious cult grown into an oppressive empire in his name and run not by a false prophet, but by that man who did those things. It's something subtle, but take a note of Warlock in this picture compared to Magus. Warlock is wearing his new costume, but Magus, the corrupt false god, is wearing the costume that he had when he was being the Messiah. While Space Jesus Warlock's story had nothing to say, the Magus storyline does. The self-appointed cult of personality will turn the righteous to evil purposes. It will be a recurring motif that the people Warlock faces that are doing vile deeds are otherwise good people. Amusingly for Marvel Comics characters, their flaw is that they are true believers. In Strange Tales 180, Warlock and Pip walk the center of the Universal Church of Truth, Homeworld, thanks to Pip's own experiences and the memories stolen from Autolycus. Unfortunately, trolls, while having an otherwise humanoid appearance, are just as bad as the other species because of their decadent tendencies, and trouble quickly finds the pair. Warlock deals with these Black Knights, but it takes all his strength to stop the Soul Gem from stealing the souls of the vanquished. Meanwhile, the Matriarch has realized that if she kills Warlock, and therefore the Magus, the entire church might collapse. So she has decided Warlock should be captured and made her servant, not killed. But while she makes her plans, Warlock attempts to rid himself of his soul gem, only to discover that he is so tied to it that without it, he'll die. To pause there, Mark Gruenwald, a skilled master of Marvel continuity, especially in how to tie things together in a good story rather than a complicated mess, would work to tie together a bunch of points in a 3-part story over in, once again, Marvel 2-in-1. See, in a one-off appearance in the Incredible Hulk Annual number 6, the scientist that created Warlock tried again, making a dude named Paragon, who was likewise dissatisfied with them and returned to a cocoon. Well, in Marvel 2-in-1 number 61, the cocoon was found and the inhabitant hatched after the transformation. The being once referred to as Paragon decided that if Warlock, aka him, was perfect, and the need was there to create a race of perfect beings, then logically Paragon should become Adam Warlock's mate, her. Over the course of events, they run across the guy who provided the narration of Warlock's backstory in Strange Tales number 178, Sphinxor. Turns out he was an actual person. He's in charge of a group that's been hired to move Counter-Earth to the realm of the Beyonders. This is before the original Secret Wars, by the way. But he knew that Warlock would neither approve of this nor allow them to do it. So while Warlock was dead after his crucifixion, Sphinxor tampered with the Soul Gem to explain why it would start becoming vampiric, as Warlock described it. Likely it wasn't functioning at its full capacity beforehand, which is why Warlock could so easily vanquish the new men afterwards. He had the full power of a Soul Gem to work with now. Back to Strange Tales, Warlock answers the Matriarch's call to her, abandoning Pip, where he learns the horrible truth. The Magus is not a part of himself, as he'd suspected. He is the man Warlock is destined to become. Warlock can't accept that he would ever become so twisted, but the Matriarch only cares about brainwashing her god before his inevitable rise, and so drops him into a kangaroo court presided over by Krator. The prosecutor is a giant mouth, and the voice for the defense is a mute, sleepy eyeball. As you might gather, Starlin's work does not show a man who's got a lot of faith in institutions. A recurring theme is that they exist to allow for a status quo of exploitation, whether it be religious, business, or government. Krator openly states the district attorney's job is to provide, quote, phony charges, lying witnesses, and falsified evidence. When a witness refuses to testify against Warlock, he's murdered on the spot. During this, Pip runs into a new green-skinned figure in a bar, the most dangerous woman in the galaxy, Gamora. She wants to either join with Warlock against the Magus, or to kill Warlock himself, meaning she likely knows his fate as well. As for Warlock, he allows the trial to reach its conclusion, and in his rage at this perversion of justice, he gives in to temptation and commands the Soul Gem to steal Krator's soul. In so doing, he finds that even the judge of a kangaroo court could be sincere, that he was a genuine believer that was protecting the church from a horrible villain. And as he passes out, Warlock laments that by stealing his soul, Warlock has unwittingly proven him right. Only a villain would gobble up someone else's soul. The final issue of Strange Tales with Warlock, issue number 181, shows the degree to which Starlin took issue with institutions, because in this one he mocks Marvel Comics itself. At this time, Len Wein had succeeded Roy Thomas as editor-in-chief, and in this issue, Warlock is being brainwashed by being thrust into a land of clowns, where Len Teen leads the land of the way it is. On his journey, Warlock has clown makeup applied in a mockery of the times that Starlin's art was changed without his permission, most notably on a cover of Captain Marvel where the face was redone, because that's the way it is. The enforced conformity of Marvel is mocked until it is shown that the clowns are creating a mountain of trash with only the occasional diamond inside, despite their best efforts to keep that kind of stuff out of there. The only one spared is a transparent stand-in for Roy Thomas, being punished by the other clowns for resisting the way it is, which is for the good of the system, you see. All of this is an attempt at brainwashing by the church, but Warlock's will is distorting their intended visions into this farce. Meanwhile, Gamora and Pip have learned that Warlock is being held in the pit and fight their way down there to try and free him. But Warlock has forced the lead clown to take him to the only exit through the doors of madness, but it takes him to the madness monster. This is Warlock's darkest thoughts all given form, the part of himself that will birth the magus, a perspective upon things that is antithetical to what Warlock thinks of himself, but is nevertheless there. It is perhaps the ultimate rejection of Warlock as Messiah, where he was good and knew that he was good, and the man-beast was evil, and the man-beast knew it was evil. What he would call evil, Warlock realized, was a different way of looking at things. Now that's not to say that both are equally valid, but rather that it does not spring from an impulse to do the bad thing, but a willingness to do what might otherwise be a bad thing under different circumstances, because the feeling is that these circumstances justify it. Rationalization is how we all find a way to call something righteous that we would condemn if done under other circumstances. Thus, with a magus way of thinking alongside of his own, Warlock feels himself to be quite mad. But he has nevertheless escaped just as Pip and Gamora were about to free him, and together they face the real magus, the image I showed you earlier, gloating that Warlock is now inevitably on the path of becoming himself. This brings this chapter of our tale to an end. In our next part, Thanos re-enters the picture, and characters begin dropping like flies.